countdown, and now we're underway. To wake you guys up on day one, it's cold outside, half of you are half asleep. I put something a little bit special together for you. So I'm excited about this. Let me push a couple buttons and I will get this little show on the road for you. I'm actually going to turn the lights out completely, which I don't really ever do, because this is all for the drama here. Trying to make this a little bit memorable. You guys excited? Half of you have fallen back to sleep. Okay, here we go. No, what the hell happened? Hold on. That was not so dramatic. Here we go. I pushed the wrong button. There's more music than that. You guys like that? Is that good? Hey, now, I spent my entire morning yesterday putting that together, so for what it's worth. When my junior in high school and my 8th grader said it was cool, then I thought, okay, I'm probably in pretty good shape. So we have a whole bunch of introductions and sort of housekeeping things to take care of and talk about. So if you're not paying attention, it's a good time to pay attention. Take some notes on what we're going to be talking about, because I'm going to run through some important people in this course and introduce you to them. I'm also going to show you how things are lined up here on Blackboard as well as on Launchpad. So this is sort of part 2 of the course introduction before we continue with what we were talking about regarding Intro Psych on Thursday. So let me introduce the TAs first. These guys are up front. Let me make this a little bit bigger. I'll tell you what they do for us, and then I'll have them stand up and give a wave. And I don't know where they all ended up ultimately. Oh, you're all there. That's easy. The TAs are in charge of supporting me, supporting you in this course. So they're another layer of assistants within the course. They're called teaching assistants. We have 4 of them. So as I call your name, you guys can stand up and wave, and I'll tell you what these guys do. So Kevin Campbell is here. Nathan Honeycutt is here. Casey Cohen is here. And Slava is here. By the way, I just told them I've never had 4 male TAs, so there's a lot of testosterone in the front of the class right now. Their job is basically to help me with the heaviest lifting in this course, which is really around the test. So it's getting the test made, getting them copied, getting them organized, because we have different forms of the test that go out when we do a test, and then obviously, really importantly, getting the test scanned and getting the grades up into the Blackboard grade book and so forth. So they're a really important part of helping out in the course. I have a couple of their TA office hours listed for you here. Kevin and Casey are going to send them to me like pretty soon, because I'm now publicly shaming them for not having them on hand yet. But basically those office hours are a couple hours each week where they're there to help you. A big part of that office hour support is in the aftermath of a test. Okay, so to go over your test, you'll contact one of these guys, hopefully beforehand, so that they can pull your test from the big pile. And then they'll be there to go over it with you. And the reason that I do that is, for years, I couldn't get students to come in and look at their test. I think they're intimidated by me. I don't know why. I'm actually fairly nice. So I decided, you know what, they're younger, they're better looking, and so forth, so we'll let them handle the aftermath of the test. So they'll be in charge of doing that. Does that make sense? Any questions about what else they're going to do to help us out? Cool. You guys can take off, and I'll see you back at 9:30. This is like a dramatic exit, too. In addition to the support from the TAs, the new addition that we had in the fall was this program called Supplemental Instruction. I referenced it in the Star Wars intro. I referenced it last Thursday online. Here is the schedule for supplemental instruction each week. If you do the math here, we have 9 supplemental instruction instructors. We call them SI leaders. And they are running 2 1.5-hour sessions each. So that's 9 times 2 is 18 hours times an hour and a half is actually 27 hours of help. And look how scattered those times are, okay? The point of supplemental instruction is to have these previously successful students come back and help you guys out, okay? And so for an hour and a half each week, they're there with a variety of activities planned. They're actually in the classroom right now, and in a couple minutes they're going to come up and introduce themselves, okay? So these guys, believe it or not, are sitting in this class for the 3rd time. They did really well last spring. They came and ran SI, supplemental instruction, for the very first time in the fall, and now they're doing it again in the spring. And the reason I'm so excited about this is because we got results that looked like this in terms of the effect of supplemental instruction on student performance. I'll just tell you that this is the biggest effect that I've had for anything that I've put into my course. So what are we looking at? Scores on exam 1, 2, 3, and 4 as a function of SI participation. These folks didn't go to supplemental instruction before the first test, and they didn't do so well. They got a D+. They said, you know what? I'm going to come to Jesus, and I'm going to go to SI sessions here. They show up, and they get a B-. They jump more than 10%. It's a full letter grade from test 1 and test 2. These guys held out a little bit longer. D+, D+, bang, a 10% jump at that point. And then the bottom group took a long time to get converted. Ultimately, they didn't get as big of a bump. And here's the biggest problem. For the groups down the bottom, if you wait until you have 2 relatively weak test scores, it's hard to get out of the D and F range. Okay? So what I want to emphasize more than anything, and I think the SI leaders would echo this, is go to SI sessions from the beginning. Don't wait until you get 1 or 2 test scores that are not what you want them to be before you go and get this help. Okay? Questions about that? Yeah.
Is it more of like a additional lecture, or like a place where you go to...
Great question. Is it more like an additional lecture, or is there something else going on there? It's definitely not an additional lecture. I mean, 1 lecture is enough, really. Sometimes it feels like it's too much. Okay? They're there really to support you extracting from the lecture, for example, what were the big ideas? Okay, so one of their activities, what do they call that one where they just throw everything down that you can think of? The purge. They call it the purge, which sounds disgusting. Okay, the purge is they have you come in and they say, we want you to write down everything you remember from what you did in class on, let's say, today, Tuesday. Okay, lots of other activities. These guys are really creative. These are successful students, remember, right, from last spring, who we identified as potential people to do this. We had them come in, we interviewed them, we screened them, we trained them for 2 full days in August. These guys actually went through that training again 2 weeks ago. So they know what they're doing. They're really good at it. And again, these kinds of effects, I have never done anything in this class that pushes letter grades, that pushes grades a full letter grade on something like this. So it's the best quote-unquote treatment that we've had available to you guys. And now I think I've done your whole spiel, haven't I? So I'm going to have Maureen Garcello come up. She is the SI coordinator. She is the queen of SI and keeping this running right. Without her, it wouldn't work the way that it does. And then the SI leaders are going to come up as well so that you can put a name with a face. Do you want to do this one? If we have 2 mics, we can actually do a duet, so watch out for that. Yeah, we're not going to do that. I don't know if it's loud enough. I'll adjust it back here.
Can you hear me?
Oh, that's good.
Okay. So my name is Maureen Garcello. I am an instructional designer in instructional technology services, and I'm also a researcher. I have been researching data on student performance in this Psychology 101 class for about 5 years now, which is an extraordinarily long period of time to be focusing on whether or not you guys attend class. And what I found in my research is that a lot of students come in and think that Psych 101 is easy. I'm a human, I have a brain, I took some of this in high school maybe, and you guys come to class, and then you kind of slowly fade to black throughout the semester. The videos become like a Tuesday priority and then a Sunday priority, and then they start to build up, and then you stop coming to class because you're so behind on your content. What we found with supplemental instruction is that you actually come to class more often, you actually watch the videos more often, and you spend a little bit more time with the material, because going back to your dorm room or going to the library and just staring at these videos or revisiting your notes, which may or may not be very legible. I know that when I take notes, I go back and read them, I'm like, what did I say here? And so the SI leaders give you that opportunity to spend more time with the material, but they play games, they have crossword puzzles, they come up with like this huge curation of material, including videos outside of class that maybe will elaborate on a concept that Dr. Lemakis, you know, he's a good guy, but he maybe, assumes that you guys understand more about a certain concept than you actually do. So in my research, I found that a lot of people fail this class. The university agreed with me. The university actually identified Psych 101 as a class that has an extraordinarily historically challenged student population. And for those of you who are perhaps sitting in this class again and saw this spiel last semester, you understand that it's a tough class, and you assume it's easy, and then it's not, and then you fail, and you have to come back and hang out with Dr. L again. So the university has dedicated a number of resources to help you become more familiar with the material. And it's not a me, because I'm older, and that's kind of not fun. And it's not Dr. L, because he's kind of older, and that's not that much fun. It's these guys who are much younger and your peers and have a really, really strong grasp of the material. So I'm just the operations behind the program. I'm happy to answer any questions, but these are the guys you're going to see in the classroom over the semester. Thank you, and I wish you the very best of luck. I'll be looking at that data, and I'm excited to see jumps like this, and even more of you attending. Last semester, over 1,200 students attended an SI session. So some students came back upwards of 30 times, and most of the students came by around 5 times. Okay, and those are the students who were ultimately successful in the class. All right, here you go.
Hi everybody, I am going to be one of the SI instructors this semester. My name is Tim. I'm a second year biology major. I'm really involved here on campus. I'm involved in Greek life and many clubs and organizations. And one thing that I suggest is you strongly go to SI. So one quick thing about SI is going to 1 hour of SI is equivalent to studying for 2.5 hours on your own. I've had students that have come to me in the past, and I've seen the results, and I just strongly advise you guys come to SI.
Hey everyone, I'm Kylie. I'm a second year bio major, and this is my second semester being an SI leader. My sessions are Monday at 2:30, not 2, and Fridays at 10 in Adams Humanities 11-12. My biggest recommendation for being successful in this class is actually knowing the material in the book. So if you come to SI, we'll take something as mundane as reading the textbook and make it fun and meaningful. Hope to see you there.
Good morning, guys. How's everyone doing? My name is Harrison. My sessions will be on Tuesday at 4:30 and Thursday at, what is that, 2 o'clock? 12:30. Hasn't even had a session yet. I was talking a lot last week in the online, so that's put your face to the name. As far as campus involvement, sorry, it's early. I'm Greek. I like to snowboard. I play a lot of golf. My tip to be successful in this class, which Dr. Lemakis will probably reiterate every single class period, is coming to class and getting your clicker points. It's the easiest way to get points in the entire class. Also doing the online modules. It's so easy. It takes like 20 minutes, even if you don't read the textbook. All right.
Hey there, my name is Shiloh. If you're looking for Shiloh, you're never going to find it. It's the name with the X. If you come to my sessions, I'll tell you the story behind it. My sessions are at 10, at Mondays at 10 in Student Services West at 2660, and today at 2 p.m. at eBay 410. eBay 410 is fun, so come by. I'm a second year public health major. I'm involved in student organization, Students for Public Health. I'm also part of the Student Disability Advisory Board. My suggestion for you guys is to read the syllabus. It has everything. All professors will tell you that. Just read it. So, yeah, that's it.
You could clap for them. Thanks. All right, so yeah, seriously, read the syllabus because it's got the answers to 90% of the questions I get. Let me run you guys through what is where on Blackboard here, because there are a lot of buttons. I want to make sure you know what's going on here. So the announcements are obviously, well, the announcements. The syllabus link is here. I think the most important thing I want you guys to realize about the syllabus is something that I mentioned last week in the online session, but I want to be explicit about it here with you guys, which is in the schedule here. If I make this bigger. In the schedule, I want you to realize that we've got this list of learning outcomes, and these guys will talk about this, I'm sure, in the SI sessions. The learning outcomes for each chapter basically tell you what you need to be able to do for that chapter to be successful with that content. Okay? So in this first segment, a definition of psychology, some of the subfields, some of the influential people, some of the different perspectives or different approaches to psychology, a whole lot of learning outcomes here on bio. So that's an important document, if only for the schedule and that list of learning outcomes that effectively could be your study guide. Okay, I've seen students in past semesters, and I know some of the SI leaders help to sort of put content under those different headings of those different learning outcomes as the test time comes closer. My contact information is there where it says Contact Dr. L. I got that really nice picture there as well. So my email, my phone number are there. The supplemental instruction link has the link through to this calendar that we had up before. You can view it weekly or monthly or however you want to do that. To register your iClicker, you click on the button that says, register your iClicker. This is so simple that I would recommend that if you can't register your clicker successfully, you maybe should drop the class, because all you have to do is put the number in and click submit. If that is above the level of challenge that you're ready for, I'm going to ask more than that. So make sure you do that, because that's how you're going to get the points. And as Harrison said, these are the easy points. You show up, you participate. If you get half of the questions right over the course of the semester, and all of you will get way more than half of the questions right if you're here every day gets you 85 out of 100 points. Okay? So just be here and participate, because what we do in class overlaps significantly with what shows up on the test. The research participation information. This is alluded to in the syllabus, and I'm going to ask you guys to read it in the syllabus. There's a little paragraph here about the research requirement. Each of you is required to take part in 4 hours, also known as 4 credits of research, or to write 2 abstracts of articles. Basically, all this is spelled out for you guys on Blackboard. When you click on the link here that says research participation information, it goes directly to this YouTube video where they start running you through this. It's 11 minutes long. You should just watch it all the way through. Okay, I asked them to do it via video like this so that we don't take up even more of our time on our first face-to-face class session day. It spells everything out. The only thing that I would amplify in here is that if you get 2 of the 4 hours done by the mid-semester deadline, which for you guys will probably be in late March sometime, then you can get 7 points of extra credit, which represents 1% of your grade. It's not a make it or break it thing, but to get those 7 points, you have to have 2 hours done of participation, and you can't have any unexcused absences for the research participation. Okay, so the absences part is not about coming to class. It's about if you sign up for a study, you have to go and do it. Okay, and they explain to you on here how to register on the SONA website and all those goodies. Basically, if you email me with a question about research participation, I'm going to refer you back to the video, because I don't know any more than what's spelled out in the video. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to be unhelpful, but this is a departmental thing that they fold into this course. Somebody else runs it, and when any time questions come up, I just refer you guys to them, okay? In fact, let me just let you know that the contact info, it's probably at the very end of the video here, is this Sci101 paper at Gmail. You may want to write that down if you have questions about research participation. The email of the person who's in charge is sci101paper at gmail.com, okay? Because if you email me, I'm just going to say you should email those guys, okay? So that will be spelled out if you just click through and watch that video. I showed you earlier the TA's office hours. We're going to finish filling those in once I get them from Kevin and Casey as well. I'm giving you guys incomplete lecture slides. So for what we're doing today, if you click on this link, what you'll be able to do is have slides that will let you take a look at what we're doing, and we'll spell this out in a way that will let you just kind of fill in the blanks on some things so you're not trying to write everything down, okay? It gives you an opportunity to do a little less transcribing in here and a little more listening to what we're talking about. Okay, so use those. You can just open them on your computer or whatever device you're taking notes on, and that's totally fine with me. Although, actually, I will tell you that the research on note-taking shows that there's a more positive impact from handwriting your notes than taking notes on a computer. And it looks like it's because when you're taking notes on a computer, you're trying to effectively transcribe everything I'm saying. Whereas when you're doing the handwriting, you're listening more and you're grabbing bigger ideas rather than trying to write everything, because you know you can't write everything. So I would recommend handwritten notes, but that's totally up to you guys. Thursday live online sessions is where you go for the Thursday online sessions. I've already put one in for this Thursday. Research Methods Part 1 is what we'll be doing. You click through from that link and you're good to go if you want to log in at 8 on Thursday. Where are my folks who were there live last Thursday at 8 o'clock? You guys are scattered around a little more. One semester, you don't get any credit for that. You're supposed to be there. That's Harrison, and I'm giving a hard time too. Usually you guys are sitting way up front, but you're spread around. So it's up to you if you want to be there live. If you don't choose to be there live, then you go on the button that says Thursday Online Recordings. Here is the one from last week. When you click on this, you can either view it with a little purple button, which will open a Collaborate session on your computer, or once it's done being processed, an MP4 video shows up. You don't need to email me if the MP4 video is not up right away. It takes some time to process. Usually when we're done at 9:15, that button shows up so that I can process it by like 10:30. Sometimes it takes till early afternoon to be done. I can't make any of that happen faster. I'm not in control of that. I just push the button that says, hey, make me an MP4 of this, and then it does magically whatever it does. Okay, so that's where you'll find the recordings for what we do Thursday online recordings. This is where the lecture recording that we're making right now will land, and it will say like Course Introduction Part 2. It gives you the opportunity to go back and hear again exactly what I said about whatever the topic might be. And I think that's everything I want to run through there. Questions about what's going on Blackboard? That makes sense? Okay, let me take about 2 more minutes to show you guys on Launchpad. Most importantly, where you go to do the quizzes, because as Harrison said, this is the other part of the easy points. There are 120 points that you can get here. That's equivalent to a test score, and if you guys are diligent, all of you will get all 120 points. Okay, so students always ask after test number 1, are you going to curve it? What's the answer about curving? Do I ever curve? Why don't I curve? What I always say is I don't want to be on an airplane that's piloted by somebody who is graded on a curve. Okay, they know a little bit more than everybody else who didn't, but they don't really know how to fly the plane. That's not going to work out well. You earn the curve by doing the homework here. You can grab the quizzes either by when you're in the chapter here, let's say for chapter 1, and let's say you're working your way through part 1A, because that's the very beginning. Here's Learning Curve 1A. If you click on it, you'll be right into the quiz itself right there. The other, even more direct way, I think, is just to go into the calendar over here, which says, well, calendar. And it gives you a list of all of these quizzes that are due. The first set's not due this coming Sunday, but the Sunday after it, so it'll be 11 p.m. The night after the Super Bowl here. So if you want to do 1A, you click on it, you click Open, and you're off and running doing Learning Curve quiz number 1. Okay? All you do is just keep banging on it until you get to the target score. For this one, the target score is 150, and you'll see this progress bar get bigger and bigger and bigger, and once you reach the target score, you've gotten the points for that quiz. Okay? You can keep answering questions, that's fine. You've already locked in the points. And I would recommend continuing to answer questions because all of that is what's called retrieval practice. Retrieval practice is a fancy word for pulling back out of memory stuff that you've put into memory by reading the textbook, by coming to class, etc. The more that you do that, the stronger the connections are for memory, and the more likely you are to remember those items when the test rolls around. Okay? So that is what I wanted to show you on Launchpad. Any other questions about anything in the course about how things work and so forth? Any confusion about anything? Are you guys awake? Not real. Okay, at least you're being honest, so you get some points for being honest. Yeah.
For the SIs, are the instructors going to be doing like the same thing in the week?
Great question. So at the SI sessions, are these guys going to be doing what we've been doing in that week? Yes, they are. Yeah, so they'll be focused on, like today, what we talked about this morning. And as we get closer to the test, they might step back and, look at what are the big ideas from the chapter on biology. What are the things you want to know there? The one thing that we are tweaking this spring is our tests are on Tuesdays. And what we found in the fall, when the tests were actually on Thursdays, because it was the reverse, was that like 1 million people would show up for SI sessions the night before the test. That's not the design of this program. This treatment, if you will, is about going all the way through. It's not about showing up for what you think might be a review session. That's not what SI is about. And so we actually have decided as a program, we're not going to run an SI session on the Monday before the test on Tuesday. Okay? Because that's sort of a misuse of what this is about. And it's a disservice to everybody because what happens is, what did you have, Kylie? 60-something? 63. She had 63 people show up in a room that was for like 30 people. And then people get pissed off because it's loud and there's no place to sit, and we want you to spread it out, right? I mentioned this online on Thursday, that the best way to learn material is to distribute your practice over time. So start doing that now by going to SI now. We're not going to have it set up so that you could try to show up on Monday night before the Tuesday test and cram, because the cramming doesn't work. So yeah, they do. That was a long answer to a good short question, which is, yeah, they'll be focused on what we've just been talking about. Good. Any other questions? All right, let's pick up where we left off. We're actually going to talk about psych now. We got about 45 minutes to finish up the material that will lead us into the research methods section that we'll be doing on Thursday online. So let me grab my slides here. It's this one, I think. Yeah. So what I usually like to do at the beginning each time, I won't really do it so much this time, is I like to hit on the big ideas from the previous session before we just sort of blast into the next session. So you'll see in the recording, if you haven't watched it from Thursday, we spent a fair amount of time on this slide pulling apart this definition of psychology, right? The scientific study of behavior and mental processes. That's going to be our focus this semester. We emphasize the scientific part. We also emphasize the mental processes to include things like your thoughts and your feelings. And then I scribbled up top this cognitive behavioral model that looked at the intersections and interactions between and among thoughts and feelings and behaviors. Then we took a run through the first of what I call the 3 great debates in the history of psychology. So rather than just doing a timeline with a bunch of names and dates and events, I like to approach the history section here by talking about the big ideas. Well, very early on, the first big idea that we talked about on Thursday was this structuralism approach from Wilhelm Wundt, pictured here, which said that we should look for the underlying components or elements, or an even simpler word, parts, that give rise to different aspects of your behavior or your mental processes. So the example we talked about would be something like memory. And the structuralists would want to know, on this first side of great debate number 1, what's the structure? What's the hardware in your head here that gives rise to memory? Well, the other side of this great debate, as we talked about on Thursday, says that's not really the right way to go. Forget about trying to find the parts, which the structuralists want to do. Instead, as functionalists, what we want to do is look at the adaptive purpose or the function of mind and behavior. And we talked about this on Thursday, right? So you guys chimed into the chat box and said, well, the purpose of memory is for things like learning from experience, right? Being able to remember things that you learned maybe in school yesterday when you take a quiz today, right? So for those reasons, there's a purpose here to memory. That's what it does for us. And so the focus from the functionalism perspective is on that, the purpose of behavior, rather than being on these parts here that the structuralists would have you focus on. So that's the first great debate. We're going to frame 3 of these. The third is going to be the most important one and the one that is woven most thoroughly through our course. So after saying that I wouldn't review the big ideas, I just reviewed the big ideas from what we talked about last time. Any questions about those first couple of big ideas from the history of psych? Make sense? Okay, and we will do some clicker questions in a bit, so if you've got your clicker with you, I'll show you how to get it turned on and on the right channel and stuff when we get to that point. Second great debate will be between Freud and his psychodynamic / psychoanalytic peers, and John Watson and B.F. Skinner and the behaviorists in just a minute. Let me just kick off the Freud discussion very briefly with some feedback from you guys about what do you know about Freud? What does he say makes people tick? Why do we do what we do according to Freud? What are some terms, some things you've heard from his approach? Maybe somewhere along the line you had AP Psych in high school or you read something in a magazine one time. So why do we do what we do according to Freud?
Was there like the ego, superego?
We got id, ego, and superego. So there are these 3 parts to personality that we'll learn later in the section on personality that are often in conflict with each other and that cause tension for you. So that's certainly part of his model. So he's part of the unconscious here, right? That those unconscious forces shape your behavior. So you do what you do, and you may not even know why you're doing it. Okay? That's Freud's model. What else? What else do you know about Freud? Or if I'm a psychoanalyst and I'm treating you for depression or anxiety, what are my treatment techniques going to involve? What I'm going to ask you to do? What's going to be going on in those sessions? And don't all jump at once because it's really overwhelming. When they depict this in a movie, somebody's in psychoanalysis, what does the patient do? What are they doing? What are they doing? Who's is their hand? Thanks be to God. Yes. They're laying on the couch, they're looking at ink blots, they might be talking about dreams, they're bitching about their mother, right? Something like that, right? So those sorts of things are part of this as well. That these unconscious conflicts are what are leading you to be lying on the couch there. And so I'm going to do psychoanalysis. I'm going to help you gain insight into these unconscious forces, and that will help you get less depressed or less anxious, okay? We'll go into some of the specific techniques of psychoanalysis in the final part of the course. It's actually the very last chapter that we cover on treatment and talk about some of those techniques. But the big word here is unconscious, right? So, you know, in terms of tips for test questions, if there's a test question that has the word unconscious in it, the answer is something about Freud or psychoanalytic approaches. Okay? It's certainly not going to be the second part of the second great debate. It's not going to be behaviorism if it's something about those unconscious forces. The big problem with Freud's ideas, and even going to your idea of looking at ink blots, is those kinds of approaches don't stand up very well to scientific investigation. Okay, and so he has a lot of these ideas that haven't stood the test of time in terms of what scientific psychology has found about what he suggests makes us tick. Okay, not all of it is horrible, but a lot of it is not standing up to scientific testing. And I think the other part that sort of damns Freud's ideas is a lot of what he offers is what we call post hoc explanations. Post hoc is just a fancy way of saying like after the fact. Okay, so something happens and it's like the Monday morning quarterback thing, right? Well, of course, what made that happen is this other stuff here, right? Looking back, like everybody can be correct when we do that, right? When you know how everything turned out and you say, oh, here's my analysis of why that happened, right? What we like in science, think about like physics, right? In physics, we can predict pretty reliably if I have two items of this mass and that mass and they're moving at these two speeds, we can predict pretty reliably like what's going to happen in terms of that collision, right? The force and how much they're going to bounce back from each other and all that. I know that when I drop something here, how fast, how quickly it will land on the ground, right? Well, we don't have that sort of thing going on here with some of his ideas, okay? They're after-the-fact explanations, and that's another criticism. In addition to criticisms around how it depicts women, about how it depicts sexuality in childhood, and we'll approach some of those topics in part 3 of the course when we talk about personality, okay? So the alternative, and the second side of great debate number 2, is offered by Watson, Skinner, and the behaviorist. So this is Watson depicted here. This is his assistant, Ms. Rayner. Anybody know who the little guy is? You guys remember? Little Albert. We're going to meet him in the section on learning. It'll be interesting to examine that example. So the behaviorist approach emphasizes the role that environmental forces play in shaping behavior. Okay? Basically, these guys take what Freud suggests and turn it on its head and say psychology should be the science of observable behavior. Okay? Forget about all this unconscious stuff. We should focus exclusively on things that are observable. Okay? And we should focus on environmental forces in shaping behavior. I'll make that explicit for you here. Environmental forces means rewards and punishments. By the way, when my writing looks like that of a first grader, I'm writing with a mouse on a slanted surface up here, so just bear with me. So we're talking about here rewards and punishments. Okay? So this model says the reason that you do what you do is not because of some unconscious factors. It's not because of a hang-up from your childhood. It's not because your parents did a horrible job of potty training you. Okay? This model says you do what you're doing because certain behaviors have been rewarded. What happens with the frequency with which you do those behaviors? When you get rewarded, how often do you do those behaviors? We do it more, right? You're doing it right now. Why are you writing notes down right now? What has happened in the past when you took notes? You effectively got rewarded in the form of what? Good grades, right? And when you got the good grades, your parents might have like given you candy, right? Or said, attaboy, right? My son texted me, my 8th grader, he got a 95 on a science test. I text him back, good job, keep working hard. Okay? That's like a virtual pat on the head, because I can't do it, because he's not here, right? So we reward the things we want to see more of, and so we see more of those behaviors. What about things you don't want people to keep doing? What do? You punish those behaviors. So this model says it's all about observable behavior, and what shapes observable behavior is what we call contingencies in our environment, rewards and punishments. Okay? So think about this course. What do I want you to do to be successful in this course? What's one thing that you should do on Tuesday mornings at 8 o'clock? Come to class. So what do I do when you come to class? What do I give you? I don't give you candy, not too often. What am I giving you with the clickers? I'm giving you points for being here and for participating, right? I also know that to be successful, as Kylie mentioned, you need to be reading the textbook, right? So how am I giving you points for reading the textbook? Learning curve quizzes. It's mind-blowing, right? I'm doing right in this class the stuff that is very behavioral. And in fact, for those of you that were there live or reviewed the recording from Thursday, that cognitive behavioral model that we talked about, remember thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, is just the later evolution of this behavioral model. And basically what happened was behaviorism in the late 1960s and early 1970s finally said, okay, I think we probably need to go beyond observable behavior because thoughts and emotions have an impact on behavior. Okay? They wanted to focus just on behavior. So that would have been the criticism of these guys. All they care about is observable behavior. But thoughts and what you say to yourself matter, And your emotions certainly have a big impact on what you do, right? Have you ever done anything in retrospect that you wish you hadn't done because maybe you were really angry? Probably all of us would nod yes to that, right? So there's emotions influencing behavior. If we only focus on observables, we miss emotions and we miss those thoughts. And those things matter. And so this model ultimately evolves into that cognitive behavioral model. So Skinner then expands on Watson's earlier work. We will revisit both of these guys later on in the semester. So when we talk about classical conditioning, we'll talk about Watson's classical conditioning of little Albert. You see the little baby here with the rat down between his legs? That's what that little white blob is. We'll explain how Watson used classical conditioning to make little Albert afraid of furry white objects like rats. Okay? If you don't know what classical conditioning is, we'll learn a lot about that. And then Skinner will revisit when we talk about operant conditioning, basically rewards and punishments. And what we'll do is further subdivide this into two forms of what's called reinforcement and then two forms of punishment. Okay? That will be actually probably the most challenging part of the course. As the SI leaders know, they build lots of exercises to practice that because it's a challenging little section. All right? Questions about the behavioral ideas here. Do you see how they're really different from Freud? Freud says like, oh, it's all in your childhood and it's unobservable. Right? These guys, by saying psychology should be the science of observable behavior, here's their box. This is psychology, the science of observable behavior. Where does that put Freud? He's out. He's not even, I don't even know what he's doing. It's not psychology, though, because psychology is the science of observable behavior. Okay? So they draw the boundaries in a way that basically eliminates him. Questions about the behavioral ideas. A ton of this has been part of how you were raised. Okay, your moms and dads and teachers and coaches use behavioral rewards and punishments all along the line. How many of you guys got like stickers in grade school for doing X, Y, or Z, or you got points? And okay, so like all of you, some of you maybe got them like last week. Your mom sent you like some, gold stars. That's just positive reinforcement. That's just rewards because they wanted to see you do more of those things. Okay, and then when we get into this, we'll talk about punishments and some examples of that stuff. All right, the third and final great debate that I want to talk about with you guys is actually connected back into the Greek philosophers. We talked about psychology emerging from philosophy when we were online on Thursday. And there were really two schools of thought early on here. The nativists on the one hand, I put up this is the slides that are blank. I opened the wrong file. Let me grab the right file. Sorry about that. No, that's not. It's just the right one. Jeez. You think I would have figured this out by now. All right. So the one school of thought was the nativism approach, which basically believed that we come preloaded with pre-existing structures and information. Basically, over time, this is the model that has come to be embodied in an emphasis on things like biology or genetics. Okay, so a nativist account for why you do what you do would emphasize biology and your genes. Okay? So let's pick a behavior we might be interested in. One that I've used here in the past that works pretty well is something like criminal behavior. Okay? You might be curious about that. Maybe you're like wanting to, to major in criminology or something like that. So the nativist account for criminal behavior would say, why do you become a criminal? Well, it's something biological. There's some kind of chemical imbalance in your brain. You've got too much testosterone, and that makes you be really, really aggressive and violent. Okay? Or maybe it's something genetically driven. You have like a criminal gene. Okay? There's something that runs in your family. Your grandfather is in prison, your father is in prison, and you were just on the latest Cops episode. Okay? So there's something going on here that's making you be this way, and it's biologically or genetically driven. Okay? What's the alternative account? Well, the alternative account says that it's not biology, but instead it's environment. Okay, so you are shaped by your environment according to the nurture side of this nature versus nurture debate. Here's the first of my many, many, many mnemonics in the course. Empiricism begins with E, and environment begins with E. Okay? I do this on purpose because mnemonics actually help you remember things when the test rolls around. So the empiricists say, well, you become a criminal. Why? Somebody raise a hand. What would be an environmental reason why someone becomes engaged in criminal behavior? In the very back row, you're going to have to be loud. Poverty. So I live in an impoverished environment, and that's a factor here from the environmental side that might drive me towards criminal behavior. Great. What else? How else might you learn to become a criminal based on your environment? I have abusive parents, so it's a violent family that I'm growing up in. Yeah.
You're missing a father figure because he's in jail?
I'm missing my father figure because he's in jail, and environmentally there are no limits set on my behavior. Okay? I could be even more explicit and say, I learned to be a bank robber because you know what my parents used to do when I was 9? They used to take me on their bank robbing runs and like explicitly point out, like, here's the best way to rob a bank. Right? So you could get sort of goofy in how you think about this nurture environment piece. And the extreme version of this is one that you probably have heard somewhere along the line. John Locke, who is a philosopher who basically espoused this idea that babies are born as a tabula rasa. How many of you guys have ever heard of that term before? Okay? It means a blank slate. So what does that mean? There's nothing loaded on here, and everything that goes on with that baby is the environment imprinting these things on them, the environment shaping them, right? If you want to make a first-time parent even more nervous than they already are, like the first time you hand them that baby, you're like, well, here's your tabula rasa. It's totally all on you, right? There's enough anxiety already when that first baby's born. And when I did this the first time after my oldest one, I'm like, oh my God, like that's a lot of pressure, right? Because everything that you do is shaping their behavior because they're this blank slate, okay? So that's sort of the extreme version of this. And the way I think about this debate now as we go forward with this is it's the first of about 1 million things that I will say probably fall along a continuum, right? On the one side, we have the nature folks who say that criminal behavior or aggressive behavior or depression or drug and alcohol problems, as an example, right, are more towards one side than towards another side. So they're nature. Right? So you develop problems with drugs and alcohol because there's a genetic linkage within your family for those kinds of problems. It runs through the generations, right? Your grandfather, well, stop picking on the grandfather. The grandmother had problems with alcohol, your mom had problems with alcohol, and you have problems with alcohol, right? The other end of it, on the nurture end, would say it's all environmentally driven, okay? The lack of parenting, aggressive parenting, modeling of these behaviors in your neighborhood, etc., would be the things that are shaping your behavior according to that empiricism side of the argument. You guys see the two sides here? Does that make sense? Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you the first clicker question before we even start it up. Let me make sure I get you guys on the right channel. So let me push a button here so I can show you magically with this doc cam. Let me zoom it in. You can see my water bottle there and whatnot. To get on the right channel, which for us is AA, not because this is an AA meeting, but just that's the channel that's the default. You press and hold the power button, and then it blinks at you and says set frequency, and you just press A, and you get a little check mark. Okay? When you answer a question successfully, you'll get a little check mark on the clicker as well. Okay? How many guys have used clickers before in another class at some point? That's awesome. So I should just shut up because you guys know what you're doing. All right. If you get stuck, just let me know. It's pretty simple to do this. So what I do on my end is I start the question. Let's look at the question. And this is a question I'm actually going to ask you again at our very last face-to-face class meeting. So the question is, right now, to what degree do you think that outcomes like intelligence, language, personality, and psych disorders are due to nature, that's the first number, or to nurture, that's the second number? I press the magic button and I start this up. Okay, yeah, I know that. Why is it telling me that? That's new. Warn again on next question. No, leave me the hell alone. Start the question already. There you go. All right. So now you guys are answering, and the number's getting bigger. It's very exciting. You guys seem very excited that the answers are flowing in. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer to this one. So I just want to see what you're thinking. So if you respond, you're getting 2 points. So you can high-five your neighbor. You already have a 2 in Psych 101. If you've done any online quizzes, you might have like 5 or 9 points at this point. Okay? Usually what I do is I usually run this clock down from a minute, but I forgot to set that up that way. So let me let it run till it gets about maybe 50 seconds, and then I stop it, and we'll see what the thinking is right now on the front end. So are we going to be more nature, more nurture, or what? Anybody having any major problems at all? Somebody around you could probably help you if you get stuck. All right, let's do 5 more seconds here. And again, everybody gets points for this first one. All right, let's take a look. So I press a button here and it shows the results. So which way are we leaning right now? Are we skewed more towards the right or more towards the left? We got more people going towards D and E, right? We add those up, what the heck is that? 50% versus 11%. So you guys right now are of the mindset that these sorts of things that I've got listed are more nurture driven, that it's environment that shapes things like intelligence, like language development, personality, and so forth. I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree right now. We're going to come back to this question as the semester unfolds because this is a big theme through the entire course. So let's talk about where this final great debate stands. For most of the things that we are going to talk about, it's really not a question of either or. It's not nature or nurture. It's nature and nurture. So rather than either or, it's a both and kind of scenario. Both of these factors seem to play a pretty significant role for things like intelligence. Okay? So how does nature play a role in intelligence? Well, you get a genetic gift, if you will, from your parents. So you should choose your parents wisely because they will have an impact on what your intelligence score will end up being. We'll talk about IQ scores at the beginning of part 3 of the course, right after we do test number 2. Okay, so things like intelligence, language development, personality, and even psychological disorders have both environmental and biological and genetic factors contributing to them. So for psychopathology, which is a fancy word for psych disorders, something like depression, is there a genetic contribution to depression? Yes. Is it a 100% genetic dictate that like if your grandmother had it and your mom had it, you're definitely getting it? No. What it means, like we'll learn in the final part of the course, is that that kind of heritability makes your risk for depression higher than it would be for someone who doesn't have that as part of their genetic makeup. Okay? So it's a vulnerability. We'll talk about a diathesis in the last part of the course. But then environment acts on it, right? What ultimately triggers your depression might not be that genetic or biological piece. It might be a bunch of life stress, right? It might be someone dying and you lose a job and consequently you have some financial problems. And it's that combination of a genetic vulnerability and then life happening. And those two things together jointly produce something like depression. Okay? So we'll come back to this for sure as we go through those different parts of the course. It becomes really more prominent in the second part of the course, in parts 3 and 4 of the 4 major sections. We'll be talking about this a lot. Okay? Questions or confusion about the nature and nurture third of the 3 great debates? Make sense? Okay. Good. I just wanted to show you this is the first of the infographics that I pop into the lecture slides just to point them out to you. It's too small for us to be able to look through it, but it maps out things like functionalism and structuralism, different perspectives, the cognitive perspective, the sociocultural perspective, the psychoanalytic perspective. So we've talked about some of these. And remember, as I mentioned on Thursday online, it's not so much about memorizing who was the guy or who was the woman associated with that thing. Do I ever ask test questions that have like, the answer is like somebody's name? Almost never. Like the answer is Freud, Watson, or Skinner. Almost never. It's almost always about, Freud's ideas or Watson's ideas. So as you look at things like this, look for the big ideas, the concepts, rather than somebody's name or some date. Okay? I don't think I've ever asked a test question where the answer was a date. Who cares? You can Google that and find it in about 2 seconds. Right? Probably less than 2 seconds. All right. Couple final things here in our last 20 minutes. I want to introduce this as an integrated model that can help you pull together different factors that might influence whatever behavior or mental process that you're interested in, right? Remember, psychology was a scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Well, this biopsychosocial approach is really an integrative approach that lets you pull in multiple factors that might be influencing an outcome that you're interested in. So it's got three parts. It's got a bio part, it's got a psycho part, and it's got a social part. So what do these mean? Well, it means something like biological influences. Okay? So let's talk about behavior and mental processes. Let's run with the example of depression. That one usually works pretty well when we talk about this stuff. So depression is the behavior/mental process that I'm interested in. What kinds of biological factors might play a role in the development of depression? Well, there could be those genetic predispositions that I alluded to just a couple minutes ago. Okay? Genetic predispositions, vulnerabilities. There could be brain mechanisms. So we're going to learn about, in the first part of the course here, different biochemical factors. We're going to talk about these things called neurotransmitters. That it turns out, in people in depression, their neurotransmitter levels for specific neurotransmitters are lower than we would expect them to be. Okay? So there's a biological piece. If you don't like the depression example, choose another behavior. Okay? You could be interested in maybe aggressive or violent behavior. Where does that come from? Well, it's probably biologically, psychologically, and socioculturally influenced. Okay? We can run with that if you want another example. So if we continue with depression, talk about psychological influences. Learned fears and other expectations, emotional responses. What about cognitive processing? This is a psychological piece that has to do with thinking, right? Anytime we see cognitive, it just means thinking. Do you guys think that there are certain ways of thinking about stuff that happens to you that might make you more prone towards veering towards depression? Do you have friends or relatives who are really negative and kind of pessimistic in the way that they think about things, right? And something goes wrong, and they do the Eeyore, oh no, right? Or the Charlie Brown, really skewed way of viewing things, right? I mean, they do this sometimes in TV shows and movies where there are characters who sort of just, they're a caricature of this way of thinking. Really negative, really distorted ways of thinking about things that might drive you towards depression, okay? So if something goes wrong, like you do poorly on a physics quiz, and you say to yourself, I'm a loser, I never do anything right, how's that going to end up making you feel? Probably not so good, right? That's the first clicker collapse of the semester. Okay? So we've got the psychological influences here, right? We've got these factors as well. And then ultimately we could talk about social/cultural, or sometimes sociocultural is what they call them, influences, right? What about, I'll just pull out this piece, cultural, societal, and family expectations. Okay? For depression, one of the things we'll talk about is the fact that we see very big gender differences between men and women in rates of depression. Who has higher rates of depression, women or men? Women, way higher rates of depression. I wonder what that's about. Well, can you guys think about cultural, societal, or family expectations about things like depression that might make guys report depression a lot less often than women do? Is any of that going on in the world? Are guys supposed to talk about feeling sad? I promise to stop standing like this in just a second. Are guys supposed to talk about feelings, and like when they're having lunch with one of their buddies, are they supposed to start crying about stuff? Are they? No. I mean, I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's okay, right? But the idea is there are certain expectations about what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do that might play a role there, right? So again, if you wanted to run with a different example besides depression, aggressive or violent behavior, are there socio-cultural influences on that? Well, yeah, if every video game you play is about beating the hell out of somebody, the fact that you go to school and beat somebody up is not super surprising to me, right? Because that's a socio-cultural influence that might have an impact on that behavior of being aggressive or violent. Okay, so the point here on this slide is that it's a model that instead of being structuralism or functionalism or behaviorism or other models that you'll read about in the textbook, it's a model that lets you pull those things together and think about biological, psychological, and socio-cultural kinds of factors. Okay, you'll see this if you take additional psych classes and become a psych major. You're going to hear biopsychosocial in 5 or 6 of those classes at least. Okay. Any questions about how that works? Does that make sense? Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about subfields, and then at the very end, I'm going to ask you one more clicker question that asks you to tell me which of these sounds most interesting to you. So I'm going to break the subfields down into 2 piles here. The research subfields, and then on the next slide, we'll talk about the applied subfields. So the research subfields have as their focus just doing research. And I don't mean just like to minimize it, but their focus is explicitly and exclusively on the research end of things. Okay? And the point of this little overview of these subfields is to give you some sense, if you're a GE student in this class or if you're a potential psych major, what do psychologists do? Because I'm betting that most of you guys think that what psychologists do is what you said earlier, right? Somebody lies on the couch, you show them ink blots, and they talk about their dreams and their childhood. The reality is that's like a small segment of what psychologists do. So biological psychologists explore the links between brain and mind. I could be a biological psychologist looking at brain structural and functional differences between kids who have autism versus kids who don't. Okay? I could be looking at biological factors that influence the development of things like Alzheimer's disease. Okay? That's what biological psychologists do. We'll talk a lot about biology in this first part of the course. Okay? We'll look at the tools that neuroscientists use. So that's another term for biological psychologists is neuroscientists. Okay? So they're going to use things like PET scans and MRIs and fMRIs to get a look at brain structure and sometimes brain function. Developmental psychologists study changes from womb to tomb. There's my Dr. Seuss rhyme of the day. Okay? From womb to tomb, changes here. It could be biological changes, so you might look at biological changes that occur at puberty. Maybe that's your thing. What I was interested in when I was sitting in your seats as an undergrad, way back in the old days before there was no internet, was social development. I was really curious about how little kids learn to get along with other little kids, right? And what I was really curious about, and probably most of all, was like when there's like an ongoing activity, how do new kids get into that activity, right? So if you get to the playground and they're already playing tag or whatever they're playing, and you just show, how do you successfully get integrated into that game, right? Do you have to have like a ticket, or how does that work, right? So that's the kind of thing that a developmental psychologist would be interested in. We will talk in the section on development in this course a lot about cognitive development. Do you think that thinking changes as kids get older? Is it different to interact with, say, my 16-year-old than it is to interact with my, well, he used to be 10. He just turned 11. Is it different to talk to my 11-year-old than it is to talk to my 16-year-old? Yeah, and it was even more dramatic when the 16-year-old was 11 and the little guy was like 5 or 6. Okay? Really, really different. Okay, and we'll talk about those things, as well as things like language development and so forth. Cognitive psychologists look at how we think about things, how we construe risk and decide what to do or what not to do. We won't talk a whole lot about that. Personality psychologists look at persistent traits. We'll do a segment on personality where we look at personality assessment. We'll actually look at those inkblot tests and say, what's the deal with these? Are these useful? Are they good, reliable, and valid measures of things that we care about? The social psych researchers do amazingly cool stuff about how the presence of others influences our behavior. Okay, in that segment, in the last quarter of the course, we look at things like social influence. So if you were doing, let's say, you were playing the guitar, would you play the guitar better if it was just you playing by yourself, or would you play better if there were 500 people watching you? Okay, the answer is it depends. You know what it depends on? Depends on how long you've been playing guitar. Okay? If you've been playing for years and years, 500 people probably is not going to affect you very much. If you've been playing for a week, you're like, oh, shit. Right? It's a very different sort of scenario. Okay, so we'll look at things like that. We'll look at peer pressure. We'll look at, like, how do people respond when other people are trying to get them to do something. We'll even get to the point where we look at obedience studies. How many of you guys have ever heard of the Milgram obedience study? The guy in the white lab coat and you're shocking the other person. We're going to look at that at the end of the semester. It's going to be really cool. Actually, I just got the movie they just made called The Experimenter. I haven't watched it yet. I may pull some of that in that segment. Let's talk about the applied fields. We got 10 minutes to go. By the way, when we get close to 9:15, you don't need to start slamming your books around and things to let me know we're done. I know when we're done, and I'll get you guys out of here, especially today because there's going to be 500 people trying to come in as you're going out. So we never go over. Just, hang loose, and I'll get you guys out of here when we're done. So applied psychologists are trying to take what we know about behavior and mental processes from psychological research and use it in the real world. Right? This was the thing that I wanted to do when I started my career in psychology, because I didn't want to just do research for research's sake. I wanted to be able to take this out and be able to help people with it. So clinical psychologists, I'm obviously biased, so I put them at the top of the list here. This is my training. So we study, assess, and treat people with psychological disorders, things like schizophrenia, any of a variety of different anxiety disorders, so things like obsessive compulsive disorder, it could be a substance use problem, depression, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, a whole host of different problems where you take what we know about assessment, diagnosis, and treatment and try to help people have less of those kinds of issues to deal with, fewer problems. Yeah.
Is there a reason why you said what he does and what she does?
For the last one, did I have he's and she's? I just try to do he's and she's all the way through. Yeah. So if I do any kind of thing like that, I don't like always saying he's or always she's, so there's no specific implication. I'm just trying to keep everybody happy. I don't want everybody getting pissed because I'm always saying he or she. So let me know if I go too far, too many he's or she's. The counseling psychologists also work with people with different kinds of problems, but usually the problems are about adjusting maybe to something like going off to college. And it's not so much that you have a diagnosable psychological disorder. You're just kind of struggling in those first couple of months being away at school and living on your own. Different things like that. So counseling psychologists do things similar to what clinical psychologists do, but on the range of things, clinical psychologists tend to see people who have more severe problems. Right? So if I'm a clinical psychologist, I might see somebody with schizophrenia who has visual hallucinations. They're seeing on this wall here, they're seeing purple spiders that are singing Kumbaya. And that's not good. Right? The counseling psychologists usually don't see people that are that extreme in their problems. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to diminish what they do. That's sort of the range of things. Education or school psychologists apply psychology to school settings. Work with teachers, principals, and parents, developing those kinds of programs we're talking about before, right? If I have a behavior problem in first grade, they might put a star chart program in for me, right? And I get 5 stars and I get some kind of a reward. Because if I don't have that in place, I'm jumping up and down on my desk and jumping out the window. Okay? So I'm putting these kinds of things in place to help out. IO, industrial organizational psychology, is the overlap between psychology and business. So I know we get a ton of business majors here at SDSU. This is the overlap between those two. So these folks work with, they might work with Google to figure out which is the best group of people to work together on this next project that they're doing. Okay? They do some kind of screening of, personality characteristics and work styles, and let's get these 5 people to be the team to do that. Okay? So if you're interested in that world of business, this is an interesting area. And we have some really cool courses, and we have some awesome teachers in the psych department who do industrial organizational psychology work. Here's the breakdown. This is right from the textbook. You don't need to memorize these numbers. Just want you to see, for instance, of where psychologists work. Lots of us work in higher ed. Lots of us work for the U.S. government or in hospitals. That, if you add that up, that's about 2/3 of folks right there. About half of us do clinical or counseling work, and then a bunch of these other areas as well. So this is a big piece of the pie, but it's not the only thing that psychologists do. And when you talk to people in the psych department who are not clinical, they sort of get annoyed that like every movie about psychologists is somebody doing clinical psychology. It's really not ever like some kind of biological psychologist doing some kind of research. All right, let me ask you a final little clicker question here. From the things I just mentioned, no right or wrong answer here again, obviously, which sounds the most interesting to you as you look at it and hear about it? So is it clinical? Is it counseling? Is it developmental? Ed psych / school psych, or the IO stuff? We got about 4 minutes to go, so hang on. I'll let this run to about 1 minute. So on Thursday online, what we do is the beginning of the research methods section. Okay? We'll be talking about different research designs, including descriptive research, correlational research, and experimental research. We'll have some interesting examples to look at and talk about as we work our way through there. All right, let me stop this at 1 minute. And just remember on the clicker points for attendance today, we did 2 questions. So if you answered at least one of them, you get 5 points for attendance, and then everybody's going to get the 4 points for the questions if you answered both of them. You guys are just trying to be nice to me, saying, yeah, clinical psych, that's the thing. That's usually what you guys are most interested in, so that's actually not too surprising. All right, so that's everything I've got for this segment. We will pick up online on Thursday. I'll see you guys then. I'll see you back here next Tuesday.